Hello, my name's Nancy Snedden and I'm a moderator for today's webinar on Understanding Reading Assessment. You can't see me, I'm just on audio, but you'll be able to see our presenters today. That's Ivana Vidakovic and Dennis Carr in a couple of minutes. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, if you'd just like to type hello or good morning into the chat box on your screen, and then I can see who's joining us. Sydney, you're the first to join us. Hello to you too. And Georgia, Valeria, that's great. We've got several people joining the room now. Wonderful. Okay, so while you're typing hello or good afternoon, good morning into the chat box, I've just got a few points to run through so that you can get the most out of today's webinar. So first of all, to get the best quality audio, we recommend that you put headphones on. If you have got headphones, you'll get clearer sound and you should be able to hear everything much better. And for the video, to make sure that you get a good quality picture on your screen, we just need to let you know that the webinar is live streamed, and that means it takes up quite a bit of bandwidth. So we do recommend that you can switch off anything else that you've got running on your computer at the same time, anything like Skype or any other programs which might slow down the webinar. If you can't see or if you can't hear very clearly, you can always try to reconnect. And the reconnect button is at the bottom of your screen. Another thing for you to check, and this is very important, is that you can that you've got access to YouTube. The webinar is streamed using YouTube, so it's very important that that's enabled on your device or in the place where you are. Okay. Don't worry if the image is a little bit blurry to begin with, and that is because of the live streaming. It's because it's all streamed online. The image should improve after a minute or two if that's the problem. The presenters will read anything important on the slides, just in case you can't see them clearly. Okay, and there is a handout for today's webinar. It was sent in the email with your login instructions, so hopefully you've already downloaded that. But if you haven't downloaded it yet, you can do that now. If you have a look on the screen, you'll see the Offers tab, and just below that you can click on Download Handout, and that will open in a new browser. Try to have it accessible during the webinar, either on screen or even better if you can print it out. Okay, so it looks like we've got lots and lots of people already. Nearly 700 people have joined us, which is fantastic. We've just got a couple of minutes before we start properly. So I'll just quickly recap a few points that I've just been talking about. So my name is Nancy Snedden. I'm a moderator for today's webinar. You can't see me, I'm just on audio at the moment. I'm here to introduce the webinar and to show you how to use some of the tools on Webinar Jam. And then I'll hand over to our two presenters, that's Ivana Vidakovic and Dennis Carr, who will talk to you about understanding reading assessment. And then I'll come back at the end of the webinar again to talk to you again about support material for the exams, and we'll finish off with a question and answer session. Right, so it's almost 2 o'clock UK time, so I'm going to officially welcome you to today's webinar on understanding reading assessment. For those of you who have only just joined us, I will just quickly recap a few points to help you make the most out of today's webinar. If you have headphones, do put them on. You'll get clearer sound if you have headphones. And to get good quality video, because the webinar is live streamed, it takes up quite a lot of bandwidth, so do try to switch off anything else running on your computer, anything like Skype, for example, and you should get a better quality image. If the image is a bit blurry, don't worry, it should improve in a minute or two. Also check you've got access to YouTube, that's very important. And the last point is a handout. You've got a handout for today's webinar. If you haven't already downloaded it, you can do that now. Have a look at the bottom of your screen. Underneath the Offers tab, you'll see Download Handout. You can do that now. Okay, I'd also like to let you know that the webinar is recorded. So afterwards, we're going to send you a link to a recording of the webinar. So you'll be able to watch everything again. You'll get the slides, the video and the audio. During the webinar, we're going to ask you to use the chat box, which I can see you're all using already. So I think you all know how to use that. That's fantastic. You're typing hello, good morning, good afternoon, etc. in the chat box. So that's brilliant. During the webinar, we might ask you to type in some comments, for example, or answer a question in the chat box. If you've got any other questions, do type them in. If it's something we can answer straight away, we'll type an answer to you in the chat box, but we will keep some of your questions for the Q&A session at the end. So don't worry if your question isn't answered straight away. Another thing that we'll ask you to do during the webinar is a poll, like a multiple choice activity. So when we do that, there'll be a question on the screen with several different options and the letters A, B, C, D, etc. And they'll appear on the right under the chat box. The presenter will ask you to choose one of the options and to click on it. So what we're going to do is practice that now. What we'd like to do is just quickly find out a bit about you before I hand over to our two presenters. So we would like to know who you are. If you look below the chat box, in a second you'll see the letters A, B, C and D. So if you're a teacher, if you click on A, if you're a coordinator or director of studies, click on B. If you're a learner, click on C. And if you're a parent, click on D. If you're attending for a different reason, then please write it in the chat box. Now, I can see lots and lots and lots of you are putting your answers in the chat box. If you could, instead of doing that, if you could actually use the poll, so if you could click on the letters A, B, C or D in the poll, that would be brilliant, and we'll get a much better idea of who you all are. So for a poll, don't type in the chat box. If you could click on the letters instead, that would be brilliant. And it just takes a few minutes for the results to come through, but it looks like already we've got quite a clear idea. Around 90% of you are teachers and maybe 9% coordinators, directors of studies. And we've also got a few learners with us as well, which is fantastic. Okay, well, that's very useful to know. Thank you very much. We'd also like to know something else. We'd like to know why you are attending today's session. So today's webinar is the fourth in a series of 6 webinars on understanding assessment. And throughout this series of webinars, we're trialling a new way to officially recognise your attendance. And by attending each webinar in this series, you'll earn a digital open badge, and that's as proof of your professional development. It's like a 21st century equivalent of a certificate of attendance. We'll send you more information about open badges after the webinar. But right now, what we'd like to know is your main reason for attending today's webinar. And we've got another poll for this. So have a look at the letters on the screen. Are you attending for A, because of the need of evidence of continuous professional development? Or B, because you want to earn an open badge? Or C, because you want to find out more about reading assessment? Or another reason. If your reason is different, you can type your answer in the chat box. So once again, don't put your answer in the chat box. If you could click on the letters, that would be fantastic. But it looks like we've got around 70% of you are attending because you want to know more about reading assessment, and around 23% because you need evidence of continuous professional development. And 3% of you want to earn an open badge, which is brilliant. So that's also really useful to know. Thank you very much. One more thing that we want to know is where you are joining the webinar from. So we've looked into registration numbers and we've created this word cloud to show which countries we think you come from. So the bigger the letters, we think, the more people we've got attending. So we think we've got quite a lot of people coming from Italy, from Russia, from Ukraine, Argentina, and so on. But just to check that, we'd like to ask you to type in the chat box, and you already are. That's brilliant, where you're coming from. So we've got Portugal, Slovakia, Russia, Brazil, Switzerland, Peru, Malaysia, all over the place. Serbia, that's fantastic. So it looks like we've got people attending from all over the world. That's great. Welcome to all of you. Okay, thank you. I mentioned open badges earlier on when we were asking you why you're attending today's webinar. If you want to find out more about open badges, you can have a look at the Open Badges page on the Cambridge English website. It'll tell you what they are, how you can earn them, and how you can collect and share them. We'll send you the link to this after the webinar, but you can see the website address on the screen in front of you. And we've also created a short video to tell you more about open badges, and we're going to play that for you now.
Hello, I'm Andrew. I work here at Cambridge English. I'm going to talk to you today about digital open badges. What is a badge? It may be easier to think about it in another way, something you're already familiar with. A certificate is an offline badge. But with a digital badge, extra information called metadata is added into the badge. This could include the name of the badge, who it was issued to, who it was issued by, when it was issued, what they did to get that badge, and much more, including digital evidence. That evidence can be anything: a video, images, a document, a blog, anything digital or that can be stored digitally. And it's just like baking a cake. Once the ingredients, the evidence is baked into the badge, you can't get it out again or change it. One of the great things about open badges is their openness. A good way to think about this is by comparing it to email. Email has a set of what are known as open standards. In other words, ways in which emails fundamentally work. So now, if you send an email from Hotmail or Gmail or Outlook, it works. All the platforms can speak to each other and understand what all the other platforms are saying. It's the same with open badges. There are a set of open standards called the OBI, Open Badges Infrastructure, that, when they're used, means that badges are open and easily transferable across platforms. If you collect Cambridge English badges and you decide you want to store them with someone else, that's just fine. And that covers another important fact about badges. The holder of the badge is in charge. You decide which badges you accept and collect, and then you decide who you show that badge to. The badge holder is in control. If you decide to issue a badge to me for being a terrible presenter, I may decide not to accept that badge. And even if I did accept it, I might decide not to show it to anyone. Lastly, badges can be linked to one another in a stack. This means that getting one badge may unlock another. Badges can be steps along a learning pathway. So why should you bother collecting digital open badges? They give a more detailed picture of you, your abilities, your interests, your experiences, and your knowledge. Most people's CVs include our education, jobs we've done, companies we've worked for, that sort of thing, big old school credentials. And as you'll see in the jar on the left, there's a lot of empty space. With badges, all that space can be filled in. An open badge can show your interests and give a lot more detail. You can give a more complete picture of your hobbies. And it's not just hobbies. Here at Cambridge English, we've issued badges for attendees at our webinars, for teachers. We think that getting that badge shows not just that you turned up to the webinar, but that you're interested in that topic and your own professional development as a teacher. These are all things you can say about yourself on your CV, but they may become more impressive and more valid if an organisation like Cambridge English could say them for you. As you collect more badges, you build up a richer and more detailed picture of yourself. So where's all this likely to lead us in the future? Well, there are some important institutions who are interested in digital badges. For example, a lot of educational institutions in the USA are adopting them already for some of their education programs. Microsoft, IBM, NASA, the BBC, Disney, all of them are working with open badges. And it's not just the big institutions. Individual teachers themselves could issue badges, perhaps to motivate their learners, or managers could issue them to recognise internal training courses their staff take. You could even use them for something like your own movie club. We think open badges represent a really interesting opportunity in the future of learning. We hope you'll enjoy getting badges from us and find them useful in your own learning journey. If you're interested in finding out more about open badges, these three experts are really worth following. Joyce Seitzinger has given an excellent TEDx talk on open badges, and you can also see her and Doug talking a lot on YouTube. and also Brian Mathers, whose excellent artwork I've used throughout. All of his work is licensed under Creative Commons. You can look him up at brianmathers.com. You could even earn your first badge on the Badges 101 course that Brian and Doug have worked on together at badges.thinkoutloudclub.com. Thanks.
Okay, hope you found that short video useful. We'd like to hear what you think about digital open badges. You can use our free app for this, and it's called Chat to Cambridge English, and you can record your thoughts on that. You could tell us, for example, how you've used your open badges, or what the pros and cons of open badges are for you, or perhaps how your open badge has helped you professionally. We'll send you a link to this app after the webinar for you to share your thoughts with us. So that's all from me for now, and we're going to start the webinar now. I'll hand you over now to our presenters for today, Ivana Vidakovic and Dennis Carr.
Thank you, Nancy. Hello, I'm Ivana Vidakovic, a Senior Research Manager at Cambridge English Language Assessment.
And I'm Dennis Carr, a Senior Assessment Manager at Cambridge English Language Assessment. Welcome to the fourth in a series of 6 webinars of Understanding Assessment. Today we'll try to help you understand some of the key ideas about reading assessment and give you practical tips. Whichever skill you are assessing, you should know why and who you are testing. So you should be aware of test purpose and test takers, as well as being aware of the impact of the test on your learners. Today we will address 3 questions. The first one is, what am I testing? This refers to the skill being tested. The technical term for this is test construct. We will then move on to the question of, how am I testing? This refers to the tasks in the test. We will end with the question, how am I scoring? This refers to how to go about assigning marks to the performance of the test takers. We'll focus on criteria for assessing responses to reading tasks, weighting, and how we can make sure that the tests are fair. Let's start with a question. What should you be aware of when creating a reading task or a test of reading? Please share your ideas in the chat box. Here's the question again. What should you be aware of when creating a reading task or a test of reading? Just waiting for some of your comments to load up. Oh, Victoria's coming in with the level of students, and of course that's very important. And Michelle with overall level. Oh gosh, they're flashing in so quickly, it's hard to keep a track. Levels coming through. Yes, level seems to be very, very strong. I did notice time flash by as well. And sub-skills. So you seem to be mentioning ideas related to level, to sub-skills and time. Here are the things that I'd like to look at. The aspects of the skill to assess, the characteristics of students, for example, age, background knowledge, language proficiency, characteristics of reading passages, texts, the advantages and disadvantages of different task types, scoring questions which require students to write an answer, and assessing students at different levels of ability. We will touch upon all these questions in our webinar today.
Let's start with looking at what am I testing? In other words, which features of reading am I aiming to test? Or which reading skills am I eliciting? Here are a few quick questions for you to answer. How do you read in real life? Which reading sub-skills do you use when you read a timetable, for example? Please write your ideas in the chat box now. So which reading skills do you use when you read a timetable? So we're still waiting for some answers. Scanning, yeah. Looking for specific information. Scanning, exactly, yeah. I think you're all quite unanimous. Looking for information, yeah. Thank you very much. So you're looking selectively for specific information, what time the bus or train leaves. So this would be scanning. How about this one? Which reading skills do you use when you read a newspaper? Is it A, skimming for the main points, B, reading carefully for detail, C, predicting what the text will be about, or D, scanning to find a particular name or figure, or E, all of the above? Please vote now using the polling buttons. So which reading skills or sub-skills do you use when you read a newspaper? Skimming, looking for specific information, scanning and skimming, it's true. Okay, let's see. Most of you are saying all of the above and skimming quite a lot, but yeah, I think we would agree on this as well.
Yes.
Regardless of the language you're reading in, you would do those similar things. So it could involve any of all those skills. And what about this one? Which reading skills do you use when you read a poem? Write your ideas in the chat box now, please. So how do you read a poem? Now let's see. Still waiting for some responses. It all depends on your purpose. Inferring, searching for reading for detail or reading in depth, reading for rhythm, beauty, specific information for analysis, exactly if you're a student. So yeah, you could be reading for pleasure, for detail, or possibly trying to analyze the deeper meaning of the poem. So again, you would be using a variety of skills or sub-skills. In a nutshell, we can differentiate between careful reading, which is linear and slow, allowing the reader to arrive at accurate comprehension of the main ideas and supporting detail, and fast reading. Fast reading could involve, firstly, skimming for gist, and secondly, scanning, looking for exact matches of specific words or phrases, figures, percentages, names, etc., and dismissing any part of the text that does not contain the pre-selected symbol. Thirdly, search reading, which is more challenging than scanning and involves a quick search for detailed information and looking for a particular meaning rather than a specific word. Here is a task for you. You can find this task in your handout, which type of reading. This is Participants Activity 1. Look at the example, either on screen or on the handout, and tell us which type of reading is tested by these two questions. Please note that you are just provided with task instructions and questions, and not a reading passage. Please type in your responses now. So which type of reading would you have to use to respond to these questions? Reading in depth, skimming, scanning for keywords, fast reading, scanning and skimming and reading for detailed meaning. Again, yeah, fast reading, reading for with a purpose. Yeah. Scanning, well, I think we kind of mostly agree that it's fast reading and scanning. So it is really an example of a task-tested scanning. Students need to quickly look through several texts, searching for specific words, such as theatre, or symbols, such as a percentage sign. Here's another task again, and it's on the handout, which type of reading. Please see Participants Activity number 2. Again, you're not provided with a reading text. Can you tell which type of reading is tested through these questions? Please just type in the chat box and tell us which type of reading would you employ to answer those questions. So, reading for gist, skimming, reading for specific information, scanning, inferencing, slow reading, careful and slow, looking for specific information and reading for depth. Okay, we've got all a variety of answers. So the type of fast reading tested here is search reading. Here, the reader needs to find information on predetermined topics by sampling relevant words, sentences, or important paragraphs. Here's the third task, also on the handout, which type of reading, and this is Participants Activity 3. Tell us which type of fast reading is tested here. Again, you have task instructions in the question, but not the reading text. So please tell us which type of reading would you use here. Okay, reading for gist. Quite a lot of responses around reading for gist and skimming. This is correct, yeah. The type of reading tested here is skimming. A learner is given a long passage and a short amount of time to get an idea of what the whole text is about. The reader needs to get the idea of a gist based on as few details from the text as possible. And finally, what kind of reading is tested here? Look at Participants Activity 4 on the handout. Please look at Participants Activity 4 and tell us what type of reading is tested here. Okay, let me just see. Are we getting responses to this item, to these questions? So skimming for gist and fast reading, some people say. Inferring, reading for detail, choosing. Looking for specific information, a lot of inferencing, looking for detailed information, understanding detailed information, accuracy, reading for accuracy, yeah. So this is careful reading. A learner will need to read the text carefully to accurately understand detail. So we've looked at some different kinds of tasks which encourage both fast and careful reading. Let's think for a minute about practicing these skills. Careful reading is needed at all proficiency levels, but in day-to-day life we also need to be able to read quickly. However, at lower proficiency levels, learners may not be able to automatically recognize letter-sound correspondences and blend them into words. Much of their attention is focused on decoding. This process should become automatic before we expect learners to read quickly. So fast reading can be introduced to classroom and assessment activities at an intermediate level, B1 level on the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, or the CEFR, and it should receive a more intense focus from B2 level upwards. Bear in mind that some types of fast reading are more challenging than others. So introduce scanning, searching for exact word matches in a text, as a less challenging type of fast reading at B1 level on the CFR. From B2 onwards, teach them more challenging types of fast reading, such as skimming for gist and searching for predetermined information. You'll need to practice both careful and fast reading with your students, and also practice switching between the two in a single task. So we've talked about part of the test construct, the different types of reading that we need to test. Now let's think about some of the other skills that readers use to read effectively. When we read, we process different levels of information, and you can see this chart on your handout. What do we do when we read? At the lowest level, we recognize letters and understand words. Then we understand the basic meaning of a phrase and of a whole sentence. Next, we understand the meaning which is not explicitly present in the sentence, a meaning which is implied, so we read between the lines. We then understand or build meaning across sentences and a paragraph. We understand information across a whole text. And finally, we can understand and combine information across several texts. There is a progression in terms of cognitive challenge, which is why reading tests may differ in the coverage of these cognitive processes. In a moment, we will see how tasks can differ in terms of cognitive challenge and the key cognitive processes. But it is important to add that skilled readers do not just begin reading by focusing on individual words. In addition to building meaning from the level of words to the level of a whole text or texts, skilled readers also set goals in terms of how they will read a text. That is, they decide which reading subskill or subskills they will use. They draw on their knowledge of the world or the topic in order to predict what the text will be about. Then they monitor their own comprehension as they read. And they also reread sections of the text to check understanding if they think they may have misunderstood. Let's see if you can apply your knowledge of cognitive processes to this task. Please read the extract of a poem on the screen and answer the question which follows it. some of this is English, but other words are a made-up language. Even so, you should be able to answer the question by using your knowledge of English. So just read it through quickly and see if you can answer. The extract is also on your handout. Which cognitive processes? So the question is, what did the toves do? And A, they waved. B, they jarred and jimbled. And C, they brilligged. So please choose your response. So please use the poll rather than the chat box. So most of you say they jarred and jimbled, which is B. Some of you say they waved, they brilligged. So 96% of you said B. That's the correct answer. Looking at the same stanza, which word describes the wreaths? Find the word in the poem and type it into the chat, please. So, which word describes the wreaths? Please write in the chat box. Okay, I'm still waiting for the answers to come through. I think I'm still getting the responses from the previous one. Mome, yes. Mome, in most cases.
Mome, yeah.
Exactly. So we would agree as well.
Yes.
Based on the meaning we've built. Thank you very much. You've arrived at correct answers to those two questions because you used your knowledge of sentence structure in English. So this required some understanding of the basic meaning of phrases and sentences. Here is the next part of the poem Jabberwocky from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There. And this is also on your handout, Which Cognitive Processes? Please read the next two stanzas of the poem and answer the following question. What did the son in this poem intend to do? A, he intended to play with the Jabberwock. B, he intended to take a nap under the Tam-Tam tree. And C, he intended to attack the Jabberwock. So please read the two stanzas and pick your response in the poll, please. Okay, so most of you, 89% rising, answered C, he intended to attack the Jabberwock. Yeah, and this is the correct answer, C. You arrived at the correct answer because you used your inferencing skills. You read between the lines to understand what is implied. And finally, let's see which level of cognitive processing this task requires. Feel free to look at the chart on the handout. What do we do when we read? To remind yourself of the different levels in cognitive processing. So this task is also on the handout, Which Cognitive Processes, as participants activity number 5. So what is the key level of cognitive processing required by this task? Use the chart on the handout to help you. We're still waiting for answers. Comparing texts, comparing and contrasting information. Exactly, comparing opinions, understanding information across the whole text and combining information across texts. Correct. Thank you very much. So this task requires understanding and combining meaning across texts. The test taker needs to create a mental representation of all 4 texts and be able to compare and contrast across the texts in order to arrive at correct answers. Looking back at the 4 tasks we've just considered, which one do you think is the most challenging? And please select your response. Task 1, Task 2, Task 3, or Task 4. So we began by understanding words and sentences. Task 3 was about inferencing or reading between the lines, and Task 4 was about cross-text comprehension. So please pick the most challenging one for you. And please use the poll. So most of you, some 87% responded Task 4 is the most challenging. So combining and contrasting information across several texts, and some of you indicated it's the inferencing task. I think these are the most frequent responses. First Task 4 and then Task 3. So I would kind of agree. I mean,
I think so. I think that, you know, for different people, things are difficult, but I'd say 4 and 3 are the two most challenging.
Most challenging, I'd say so. So it's typically easier to understand explicit meaning at the level of word, phrase, or sentence than to look beyond the text and understand implicit information, or to understand information across a paragraph, a whole text, or several texts. In view of what we have discussed so far, let's think about how you can practice with your students the skills that will turn them into skilled readers. Constantly work on increasing your learners' vocabulary and grammatical knowledge, because both are crucial for comprehension. And in day-to-day and assessment situations, we may need to search for meaning rather than exact word matches. So it is useful to be able to understand paraphrase. Therefore, teach your students how to understand the same information expressed in different ways. Sometimes it will be necessary to understand information that is not explicitly mentioned in the text, so create tasks which will require learners to read between the lines. Your learners will also need to be able to distinguish between the main idea of a text or paragraph and the information which is given to support that idea. They need to be able to identify how text is structured, so what grammatical, lexical, and semantic devices does the writer use. And finally, they should learn how to compare the information within one text as well as across different texts, identifying similarities and differences. You could also encourage learners to be strategic about how they approach a reading task and improve their metacognitive skills. You could, for example, encourage them to predict what the text will be about. Prediction is useful as it can make understanding a text easier and faster. Your students could use the task instructions, the title, or their own knowledge of the world to help them make predictions. Also, the parts of the text a learner has read so far can help predict what will come next. Next, you could teach learners to set goals. Learners should begin to ask themselves questions like, how should I read this text? Carefully, quickly, both? Am I required to pull information from the entire text rather than just from one sentence or a paragraph? And how can I use clues in the questions? So let's look at a question as an example. The question, how did the writer's attitude change during the passage, informs the reader that there has been a change in attitude and that one should read the whole text or a large part of it in order to answer the question correctly. Also, emphasize how important it is for learners to monitor their own understanding and to reread words, sentences, or sections when necessary. However, it is also important to teach them not to spend too much time on unfamiliar words, but to identify whether the word is important or not, and to try to understand the gist of the whole sentence, just as you did with the Jabberwocky poem.
So far, we've talked about what reading is and how we read. Let's now think about how we go about eliciting the various different sub-skills of reading in a test. The question here is, how am I testing? And the focus is on the types of tasks and texts we can use. Let's begin with texts and discuss the differences between the texts themselves. Firstly, what do you usually read in English or another language? Please write some of the suggestions in the chat box now. So what I'd like is just, what do you usually read in English or in other languages? And if you put your answers in the chat box, that would be very good. Newspapers, of course, novels. It's flashing by. Brandon, I'll just... It's very difficult to track. Yes.
Yeah.
Novels. Yes. I mean, there's a wide range of text that we do read. So could we ask learners to read similar texts in a test? Now here on the slide, you can see some of the possible text types. Extracts from books, both fiction and non-fiction, and newspapers and magazine articles. These are all quite predictable, but we can also use advertisements and public signs or notices. Another text type is informational material. By that I mean brochures, guides, manuals, that kind of thing. And we can use correspondence, emails, text messages, and letters and so on. And there are other text types I'm sure you've come across. The demands of a particular task in a test need to be similar to those in real life, so that we can draw parallels from how someone performs on a test to how they will perform when reading in real life. This is why authentic text from a variety of sources can be used in a test, with some necessary adaptations. Here's another question for you. What are the differences between the types of the material you read? Now, for example, length could be one difference if you're comparing a newspaper article with a note from your partner about buying some groceries. Please write some of the other ideas in the chat box now. Here's the question again. What are the differences between the types of material you read? We've got length coming through, style, of course, register, target audience, lexical differences, register coming through again, and style, genre, scope. So length, as I mentioned before, but also the style of writing may be different. This mainly refers to the difference in formality between text and the relationship between the writer and the reader. The kind of language used is also important. For example, comparing a doctor's language in a prescription, where there may be some medical jargon, with an academic article on a scientific process. There may also be differences depending on the purpose for which something is written. It could be for information, for entertainment, for instruction, for making contact with others, and so on. The subject matter could be treated differently. For example, an article bringing up children could be very specialised, or it could be general in tone. Similarly, a text giving information could treat a subject in a concrete or more abstract way. And finally, the way the text is structured could vary considerably, from note form to highly connected prose, as in novels, for example. Clearly, it's important to bear in mind your learner's level of world knowledge, subject matter knowledge, and language knowledge when selecting texts. Let's take a look at criteria for text selection in a bit more detail and see how the text chosen for assessment or instruction purposes vary as the language level of the learners increases. The topic and type of information the task requires can affect the difficulty of the task. If you refer to the CEFR descriptors, you'll see that topics and/or information that are personal, familiar, concrete, and not requiring specialised knowledge are easier than those which are unfamiliar and abstract, or specialised, and which require more difficult or specialised vocabulary and complex grammar. Language also contributes to text difficulty. Text with structurally simple and short sentences consisting of common everyday words are appropriate lower proficiency levels, for example, A1 and A2 on the CEFR. At higher proficiency levels, around C1 and C2, text with structurally complex and longer sentences, including words with more complex meanings, are appropriate. And when we look at the type of discourse mode, you can see that it will affect the text structure, the writing style, the vocabulary, and possibly the language functions, and thereby pose different challenges for readers. That's why at lower proficiency levels, such as A1 and A2, for example, appropriate discourse modes are description, narration, for example, a text telling a story of an event, and instruction. Tests set at higher levels, B2, C1 and C2, should challenge the candidates by requiring them to also read and comprehend argumentative texts, which provide views or attitudes on a subject, and expository texts, which define, explain and exemplify a concept, term or phenomenon, for instance, a company merger. Care should be taken with the level of language in any of these modes, and also text structure. For example, narrative texts appropriate for A1 and A2 levels would have a clear narrative and fewer characters. In contrast, narrative texts appropriate for C1 and C2 levels could contain more characters, narrative lines, and or flashbacks, as these increase text difficulty. These examples illustrate a text with concrete information on the left from an A2 level test and a text with abstract information on the right from a C1 level test. We've looked at texts themselves and how they can differ and so be suitable for different levels. Now let's think about the types of tasks we can use when we're assessing reading comprehension. Task types for reading comprehension texts can be divided into three key groups. The first group is selected response tasks, where a test taker selects an answer from given options, such as multiple choice, multiple matching, true, false, or gapped texts, where the missing word or sentences are provided. Then we have semi-productive tasks, where some limited writing is required. For example, a gapped text where the missing words are not given, or an information transfer task may require chart or label completion or labeling. And thirdly, there are also productive or integrated skills tasks, where it's necessary to read a passage and then write a short or an extended answer, such as a summary or discussion based on that passage. As you can see, there's a wide range of task types that could be used in a test of reading comprehension. This variety in a test is necessary to ensure that all candidates have an opportunity to perform at their best and show that they can use a range of reading skills. Now we've got a task view. Don't worry about reading the text. We're just focusing on the task types here. Look at the two task types on the slide. They're also in your handout. Which task type is this? And it's Participants Activity 6. Bearing the previous list in mind, who can tell us fastest which task type these two tasks or examples are? So is it a selective response task? And if so, which kind? A semi-productive task or a productive task? We've got multiple choice coming through, multiple choice, selected response, multiple choice. It's fairly unanimous. Thank you. These are indeed examples of one of the selected response task types, multiple choice. You can see that there's a difference in the amount of text to read, which is in the red box in both examples, and the number of answer options in the blue box in both examples. So both text length and text density are different according to the level. The task on the right from a B2 level test poses a higher reading challenge than the task on the left, which is from an A2 level test, and requires a wider range of reading skills. So once again, here are two tasks using the same task type at different levels. They're on your handout as well. That's Participants Activity 7. Who can tell us which task type this is? Please write the answer in the chat box. So which task type is it? It's a gap fill, very good. Gap filling.
Semi-productive, exactly.
Semi-productive, yes, semi-productive. Again, fairly unanimous. Thank you. Yes, they're both gapped text tasks. The one on the left is an open-close from an A2 level test, where candidates have to complete the sentence with the missing words, whereas the one on the right is an extract from a gapped text with paragraphs removed and placed after the text in jumbled order from a C2 level test. Now let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of a few task types. We'll start with multiple choice questions. If you'd like to look at an example of this, there are two on your handout. Which task type is this? Take a look at Participants Activity number 6. Multiple choice questions are frequently used in tests of reading comprehension around the world. They're easy to administer and mark. given that the candidates only select a response from a given set of options. As there's no writing involved and answer options are given, they are objectively marked as right or wrong. They allow a coverage of a wide range of reading skills or task focuses. For example, they're appropriate for testing comprehension of detail, as well as comprehension of main ideas or gist, comprehension of explicit, as well as implicit meaning. They could also be used to test careful as well as fast reading. However, there are some disadvantages. Given that they require selection from a given set of options rather than writing an open-ended or semi-controlled response, they test only receptive skills and are open to guessing. Also, they're not representative of how we engage with reading tasks in real life. For that reason, they may have a negative impact on teaching and learning. For example, instead of focusing on improving their reading skills, learners may focus on how to do multiple choice tasks the best. Information transfer tasks require limited writing. See the example in the handout, pros and cons. These could come close to real-life tasks in some academic or workplace contexts. Table and chart completion or labeling parts requires comprehension of steps in a process, classification system, or comprehension of the sequence of events in a story. However, such tasks must be presented with clear guidance for how the task should be completed. For example, does one need to write one word or a phrase in each space? Learners should also be informed of scoring criteria. For instance, will they be penalised for misspelling? This means that the task needs to be very carefully thought through. Integrated skills tasks, and as an example on the handout, pros and cons again, are very realistic. Fairly often in our private, professional or academic lives, we read something and then discuss it with someone else, or write about something we have read. For this reason, such tasks could be motivating, and they also require engaging a variety of reading skills and cognitive processes. For example, you need to understand detail, main points, gist and implication, and comprehend across sentences and the entire text in order to be able to summarize or discuss what was read. The task feels like an integral part of learning and can be used in class. However, assessing reading comprehension through such tasks is inefficient for several reasons. Extended responses take a long time to rate, and time is needed to develop assessment criteria and descriptors of performance, and to make sure that teacher examiners rate reliably, given that subjective judgment is involved. In addition, reading comprehension is assessed through writing, and it may not be easy to separate comprehension ability from writing ability when giving your learner diagnostic feedback on what exactly they should improve.
So, in summary, we can see that there is no best way to test reading comprehension. Each task type has its own advantages and disadvantages, and each is suitable for different purposes. Ideally, a test should use a variety of task types so that no candidates get an unfair advantage or a disadvantage, and so that you can cover a broad range of reading skills. And here are some final points that you need to consider when developing or choosing tasks. Firstly, are tasks at the right level of difficulty for your learners? We have already discussed factors which influence task difficulty. Secondly, are the instructions to the task clear? If the instructions are not clear, the task may not assess the skills that it is designed to test. For example, learners should know if certain tasks are timed or not, or whether they are assessed on the language they produce in responding to reading comprehension questions. Another consideration is there a range of tasks in the test? As we've seen, different task types have different strengths and limitations, so including a range of task types would minimize limitations and optimize the strengths. What is the order of tasks? It is important to start with easier tasks and then move on to more difficult ones. It is also advisable for questions to follow the order in which information is presented in the passage, if you test careful and linear reading, for example. Then, what is the timing for each part of the test? You need to consider how long each task is, whether you want to time a task to ensure you assess fast reading, and also whether you're going to include any planning time in case an extended response is required in a reading comprehension task. Finally, are the scoring or marking criteria clear to the test takers? It is important to tell your students how you're going to score the tests so they know if their spelling is assessed, for example, or if some questions and tasks are worth more than the others. Giving them this information will make it a fairer test, and we will talk about scoring next.
So far, we've talked about what reading is and what considerations we should have in mind for text and task type selection. Now let's think about how we go about scoring the reading which the task has generated and the assessment criteria to use. So how can we score reading tasks? Think about a multiple choice question. What score would you give a correct answer? What score would you give an incorrect answer? Please type your responses in the chat box now. So scoring. So what would you give a correct answer and what would you give an incorrect answer? Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Catalina says 1 point. Victoria 1 point. 1 and 0. 2 to 1. Somebody says depends on the. I missed it. But it does depend on things. A correct answer 1. So people are definitely saying incorrect at 0. The correct answer 1, but it does depend. And that's right. An incorrect answer would score 0. But we can decide to award 1 mark or 2 marks, for example, to a correct answer. We can give every correct answer the same score, or we can use weighting to make some questions worth more than others. Differences in weighting should reflect differences in task demands and difficulty. Otherwise, everything could be single weighted if we believe that all answers and skills are equal for our assessment purposes. We can give guidance to markers and test takers about what spelling to accept as correct, for example. Maybe alternative British and American spelling, and whether spelling must be correct for marks to be awarded. We can also give guidance to markers about punctuation and grammar, not to penalise for incorrect use of capitalisation, for example, or whether correct grammar is required. This is essential for ensuring that test scoring is reliable.
Let's summarise what we've discussed so far. We looked at different factors that should be borne in mind when making decisions on what you want to test, how you want to test it, and how you want to score it. This discussion is ultimately important for creating a fair and relevant test of reading comprehension for your learners. We have also provided a few tips for teaching and practicing reading comprehension. So here are the key messages. You should first decide on your test construct. What are you trying to test? Which aspect or aspects of reading ability? Is this appropriate for your learners, for their level of language proficiency and real-life needs? You should then make sure you select task types that are matched to what you want to assess. Texts should be selected with task type and test construct in mind. Then you need to be very clear about scoring criteria so that you and your markers can reliably score responses and so the test takers know what they're assessed on. Next, you should decide on timing and communicate the timing of the overall test, or of each test part if relevant, to your test takers and those who administer your test. All of these factors will make the test more objective and fairer to your students. We've now come to the end of the main webinar, and in a moment Dennis and I will answer any questions you may have. So please type your questions into the chat box. But before that, Nancy is going to show you how to find some additional resources to support you and your learners.
Thank you very much, Ivana and Dennis. That was a really interesting webinar. This is Nancy again, and I'm just on audio, so you can't see me. while I'm talking, Ivana and Dennis are going to look through the questions that you've sent in, and we've just got a few so far for them to answer. If you've got a question about today's webinar that you haven't already sent in, please type it in the chat box now. Let me just remind you that you'll get an email after the webinar, probably towards the end of the week, and that will contain a link to the recording, so you'll be able to see the slides and listen to the webinar again if you want to. You'll also receive your open badge, which proves that you've attended, and a link to the app, that's Chat to Cambridge English, and a survey about open badges. And it would be great if you could complete this survey, even if you've done it before, because there are some different questions in it this month. Okay, I'm now going to talk about some materials and resources from Cambridge English Language Assessment, which you might find useful. So first of all, on the screen you can see in front of you, there's a useful website called Teaching English. And this is an online resource on the Cambridge English website. You can find free resources for teachers, information about teaching qualifications, information about the Cambridge English teaching framework, and more webinars. And you can also sign up for a newsletter, so you'll receive updates and articles. Another useful resource is this set of 4 books from the Studies in Language Testing series. And these are academic books, and they discuss in detail the assessment of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And they're published by Cambridge University Press. And next we've got Learning English. This is a new area on the Cambridge English website where learners can practice their English for free. And it consists of a variety of interactive activities at a range of levels from A1 all the way up to C2 on the CEFR. All the activities are free and learners can access them on any device, including mobile phones. There are activities for all skills, so there's listening, writing, pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar, and reading. And you can filter the activities by skill, by level, or even by the time that you've got available. So it's great, your learners can find the activities which are right for them. Okay, well that's it from me. I'm now going to hand you back to Ivana and Dennis, who will answer some of your questions on this webinar. Thank you very much, and bye-bye from me.
So here are some questions that were sent in by some of you. So Dennis, I saw one inquiring about how can we include all the information that is necessary to achieve test fairness and clarity on scoring, etc., etc., and yet keep the instructions reasonably concise and short?
Well, I think that it's of paramount importance that candidates know how, the score for each correct answer, and that should be on the paper. I think things like spelling and sort of areas like that, where the spelling needs to be correct or not, perhaps could be made clear at the beginning of the paper. And also, of course, I think if you're in an exam course, then you'll be well aware of that, and it should be available on the website whether you need to spell things correctly or not.
I agree. Yeah, some of this information should definitely be present out there, either in hard copy or online form for test takers to familiarize themselves with before the actual test, months and days and who knows what. But yeah, some nitty-gritty information should be there in task instructions.
There was one question that caught my eye about whether it was a good idea to have a reading test solely made up of multiple choice questions.
Well, I thought that we kind of answered that question already. Not only multiple choice. Multiple choice are useful to a certain extent because, as we said, they can test a variety of reading skills and they're very, very efficient. I mean, you can just easily turn around the test, get the marks, get the scores out. But if you test only through multiple choice, you may end up having negative impact on the learners who may then be just taught to either guess or strategically look for responses, and then you avoid kind of testing some other skills.
Yeah, there needs to be a range of item types, really, doesn't there?
There was another question in relation to this, maybe, which was asking us about how we see the value of translation as a task or a set of tasks that could be used to promote reading comprehension or to practice reading comprehension. And my view is there is some value in it, but I would say it's limited, because when you translate, okay, you should understand the text in depth. And you can't translate if you don't understand it in such a way, which means that in order to translate something, and we're not talking about simultaneous interpreting here, you should be able to read carefully and for detail. And so that's only one type of reading that we covered. And there are so many more, like fast reading and selective reading, which you will really, really need in real life, regardless of whether you're at the train station or at a university course where you have to kind of really read a lot of material within a limited space of time.
And of course, translation's an art form as well. I mean, some people, are using different skills, writing skills, to make their translation the most palatable for their readers. And perhaps it's something we want to move away from anyway, because there's an element of decoding in translation.
I mean, yeah, by all means, you can use it, but please be careful about how you use it. And I wanted to add, I mean, I think when we are starting to learn a new language, we have probably all been guilty of trying to translate what we're reading in our mother tongue and then translate it back into English or whichever language we're reading into. And yes, we should definitely move away from the mediation of your mother tongue or any dominant language you have, and try to kind of make the process as automatic and as natural, as spontaneous as possible. So I'm just trying to identify a few more. How can I encourage extended reading? I think the key is to have a good library at school or at the language center where you're teaching.
There was one contributor who mentioned that millennials are reading a lot less, and perhaps how's that affecting reading assessment? I mean, surely reading is still a very important skill and needs to be tested within a test of language ability. But it is interesting that people are reading less, or are they? I don't know. But they're reading different genres less.
I think I would say they're still probably reading a lot, because you can see people on the commuter trains kind of constantly glued to their iPhones or iPads.
Are they reading?
Are they reading? Well, that's a good question. But maybe it's just a matter of what genres, what text types do you read? What are the styles of those text types? And with the technology, new technology out there, like some of these things, if necessary, could also be incorporated in assessment, computer-based assessment, for example.
And in our work lives and academic lives, we are reading at least as much as we have always been, if not more, I think. I certainly do a lot of reading.
Yeah, simply because many more materials are available to us, just a stone throw away. Again, somebody's a bit unclear about the difference between skimming and scanning, and I'd say when you skim, so both are selective reading, fast and selective reading. So you don't read everything and you just avoid what you think is not relevant for your question or questions. But skimming is more about getting the gist of the text, so the main idea, the main message.
It's like scooping up little bits of meaning at the surface of
just
the text.
Imagine a bird
like skimming
flying
a stone
across,
or
skimming a stone on the water, exactly.
Whereas scanning
is more about searching for kind of exact words you may be looking. For example, if you're looking for a mention of a specific currency in a text, then you will look for the symbol of that currency.
And not be distracted by any meaning-related issues in between that scanning.
Exactly.
I hope that makes it clear.
I hope so.
So here, what do you think of simplified readers? I think that anything that encourages people to read is a good thing. But I think that it's a good entry, it's a good gateway at the lower levels at A1 and A2. But I think that we should be encouraging our students to read once they're able to, so that obviously they don't want to get discouraged once they're able to read the not simplified text, the original texts. Because I think that's one of the beauties of knowing a different language, really, a sort of entree into another world of literature.
It's true. I saw some comments in relation to this that teachers are finding it difficult or challenging to find authentic texts which are suitable enough for A1 or A2 level. And yes, I agree, it may be a challenge really. And yes, you should use some adapted text or simplified text. And maybe what you could do perhaps is pick something that they think they may understand and you adapt it yourself, provided you have the time. Otherwise, try to think outside the box a bit and use what is already out there and available. For example, some street signs or messages or notes, brief notes that could be used in their authentic form for lower level readers.
Certainly, as teachers these days, we've got so much more access to authentic material online. Really, when I started teaching, you were somewhere teaching in the world, and your choices for authentic material were very, very limited. But now there's so much available.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, we have run out of time.
Oh dear.
Yeah, we could stay here.
We could stay
for
here
another hour.
Longer, yeah.
But if you have any further queries which are exam related, then please drop us a line and we'll be happy to respond.
Yeah, more than happy.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Take care now.